Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, always nice to do something a little bit different. Something maybe that some of the other whiskey reviewers don't tend to do, but I don't tend to sort of pay much attention to. No, that's probably the wrong thing to say, isn't it? Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. I thought last week's episode of the show was a bit of fun. Always like to do something a little bit different, blended whiskey, all that kind of stuff. Big thank you for those of you that watched it, and please keep your comments coming. Before we delve into this week's episode of the show, just to let you know, there'll probably be only 2 more episodes of the show, well, 1 more after this. So next week will probably be the festive episode of the show. As you know, I like to do something a little bit special for the Christmas episode. So if I get the opportunity to sort of shoehorn in another one before the end of the year, I'll obviously try and do so. But as you well know, this time of year it tends to be 6-day weeks, and sort of, I'm pretty much living at work, so there ain't much time, unfortunately, for episodes of the show. So like I said, next week's episode will be the festive episode. Anyway, on to today's episode of the show. I thought, as it was Thanksgiving in America earlier on this week, Thursday I think it was, wasn't it, I'd do another episode of the show on American whiskey. It's been actually 2 years since I've done a sort of a roundup episode of the show, if you like, although obviously earlier this year I did an episode of the show on Barrell Craft Spirits, and I have one of their bottlings here or one of their newer bottlings in the lineup for today's episode of the show. And I've kind of collect samples over time. I mean, some of these are quite old. The sort of the Larceny, I think, comes from I hate to think when World Whiskey Awards way back when I actually got the opportunity to sort of judge the American whiskies. As you probably know, the World Whiskey Awards seems to have changed so that people within their own country tend to sort of certainly in the early stages, judge their own whiskies. So the Americans judge the American entries, the Japanese, and so on and so forth. Whether that's the right thing or not, who knows? It's how they do it now. I mean, I would have personally thought that getting more of a broader sort of opinion on these whiskies is probably the best thing to do, but obviously I don't make the rules. I just do what I'm told at the end of the day. Anyway, so I've got 6 American whiskies, all I think rather quite interesting. So let's just take a look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with first of the 2 from the Heaven Hill stable. This is Larceny Small Batch, 92 proof, or 46%. Interesting thing about the Larceny, I believe, is that the mash bill includes, instead of using rye, they substitute wheat, so it's sort of corn, wheat, and a little bit of malted barley. I think it's about 20% wheat, if memory serves me correct, so that should be interesting to start off with. Second bottling is a sample that came from a viewer, J.R. Lancelet. Thank you, J.R., for that sample. And it's Uncle Nearest 1884 Small Batch Tennessee Whiskey, bottled at 46.5%. Now, I have heard an awful lot about the Uncle Nearest. I mean, certainly it was a few years ago now when I think they first appeared, and they seemed to win awards left, right and centre, and everybody was raving about their bottlings. Obviously I don't believe they own a distillery, so I assume it's all sourced ingredients, probably MGP I would imagine, but as we know, MGP produce some pretty good spirits, so I've got no issue with that. So I'm kind of quite looking forward to tasting that, as a lot of fuss has been made about it. Bottling number 3 is the first of 2 that comes from the Buffalo Trace stable, or Sazerac stable as the case may be. This is Abraham Bowman's Double Barrel Bourbon, bottled at 50%. I believe this bottling was distilled in 2006 and bottled in 2014, yep, a long time ago now. So it spent 6 to 7 years in New Oak, and then they finished it for an additional year in New Oak again. Gimmick possibly, but we shall see when we get to tasting it. Second bottling from the Sazerac stable is the good old Eagle Rare 10-year-old. So this is bottled at 45%, and it's as far as I'm concerned, the go-to Buffalo Trace bottling after they mucked around with the Buffalo Trace bottling, as you well know. Then we're going to move on to the new release from Barrell Craft Spirits in their Cask Finish series. This is the Mizunara, bottled at 58.21%. It has effectively a derived mash bill of 76% corn, 20% rye, 4% malted barley, and is finished for 18 months in Mizunara or Japanese oak casks. So really looking forward to seeing how Japanese oak works with bourbon. I think it's going to be really quite interesting. And the last bottling again was from the Heaven Hill stable. This is the Elijah Craig 12-year-old barrel proof. This one is 68.3%. I mean, dear God, 68.3. Wow. I think that's even. Certainly that's more than probably some of the Buffalo Trace George T. Stagg bottlings, and so I imagine that was that must have been in a pretty warm warehouse to sort of like get to that level of ABV. But anyway, it's batch number A120 and was bottled in 2022. So nothing like going out on a bang, is there? So pretty much, just actually thinking, that's pretty much got to be the highest ABV bottling that I've actually come across, I think. Yeah, so kind of quite looking forward to tasting that one. Anyway, so that's today's lineup. Let's kick off with the Larceny. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Heaven Hill Larceny. Great name for a bourbon, as we said, or great name for a whiskey, full stop. You know, sort of obviously prohibition connotations and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. It's quite deep, quite dense, almost treacly, quite rich, soft. Obviously not getting any spicy notes because obviously there's no rye there, so it's kind of thick, almost like I said, treacly kind of sweet corn. I mean, it's a bit straightforward. I mean, it's not an expensive bottling, I don't think. I mean, it's not going to sort of blow you away, but you know, it's pleasant. It's nothing wrong with it at all. Nice nose. Let's see what the parts are. Again, quite full, quite dark, treacly again. It's got that sort of treacly sort of richness to it. It's a little bit drying on the finish. The oak kind of kicks in. There's no real bitterness. There's a bit of rose petal Mars, a bit of youthfulness. It's a nice softness to it. There's a little bit of a sort of a wheatiness there. It's relatively straightforward. It delivers quite pleasantly, I think. It's a nice starter, and yeah, I think it's quite a nice one to start with. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Uncle Nearest. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Quite different to the Larceny. It's a lot more sort of focused, a lot more crisp, sour, a distinctive sour mash character coming through. Corn biscuits, vanilla, sweet corn, touch of rye. It's almost too lean, if you like. I mean, I know it's got a kind of a focus and a freshness, but there's a bit too much of a leanness there. I'm not getting any real fatness or sweetness from the corn. It's okay. I mean, it's all right. I mean, it's not something I'm going to sort of go, my God, that's incredible. It's an interesting nose, nevertheless. Yeah, sure, that's right. Yeah, it's right. Again, it's pleasant. I mean, it opens up with some nice corn. It's got a little bit more weight, a little bit more fullness on the palate. There's a touch of pepper, a little bit of spice comes through on the mid palate, which lingers through to the finish. It's, yeah, I mean, what's this retailing for? 60 quid? I think there are other bourbons of that sort of price range that I think I would favour over this. Like I say, absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. It's quite pleasant, it's okay. But again, it's kind of like, you know, not setting my pants on fire, as I say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Abraham Bowman double barrel. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Well, it's quite a fair chunk of oak, sweet, buttery, vanilla, again, sort of like touch of rye. It's got that sort of slight violety rye kind of character. Earth, dried fruit, biscuits, corn biscuits. I mean, it's an okay nose. I mean, it is pretty heavy on the oak, as I would have expected. I mean, I must admit, is it a bit of a gimmick, sort of finishing it in a new oak barrel? I mean, one does have to wonder what the point is. I mean, considering it's not like it's not going to have any oak character to start off with because you're using well-used casks. I mean, it has to be initially aged in virgin oak anyway, so is it maybe that those virgin oak casks didn't kind of deliver enough vanillins, enough butteriness? I don't honestly know. It's maybe they just thought, well, let's give it a try. Why not? Let's try it out. I mean, you know, some of the other American distillers have done, you know, odd things, like, you know, I'm just trying to think of one off the top of my head. Jim Beam Devil Cask, you know, sucking out the whiskey from the staves. I mean, you know, I mean, again, sort of a bit of a gimmick, really, because it's not exactly the world's greatest bourbon. It has to be said, very bitter. Which is obviously, you know, not surprised when you're kind of like, you know, clawing the sort of like the spirit out of the oak, you know, take those splinters with you. But anyway, coming back to the double barrel, yeah, it's all right. It's okay. Let's see what the past one. Really takes a bit of time to get going, in actual fact. Lovely spicy finish, it has to be said. The rye coming through with a sort of like a dark peppery kind of spice. Bittering oak on the finish, but I don't get a huge amount of vanillins. I mean, I was expecting a little bit more sort of like, you know, in your face kind of vanilla and oak and that kind of thing, and it's actually quite reserved. There's not an awful lot of oak character, or should we say there's not as much oak character as the nose would kind of lead you to believe. I mean, again, you know, pleasant sort of corn base, good length, like I said, lovely spiciness on the finish, but again, it's an overall kind of okay whiskey. It's not going to sort of like, you know, suddenly make you sort of want to scream hallelujah and all that kind of stuff, but then again, you know, it's not a bad whiskey, so yeah. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Eagle Rare 10. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Okay, that's more like it. It's got a lovely dark rye spice intensity, dark fruit, vanilla. It's got a touch of edgy spices, a little bit of rose petal. Now that's nice. Again, it's not an overly oaked monster. It's really nicely balanced. The rye is coming through quite strongly. Starting to become a bit more, the rye is becoming a little bit more herbal now as it sort of, you know, aerates. And there's a little bit of a sweetness there, not too much, just enough sweetness there. This is an impressive nose, it has to be said. It's the first nose in the lineup that I've gone, I mean, maybe it's because I love rye. I mean, you know, I do like my rye whiskies and I like my bourbons, generally speaking, to have a relatively high rye content. But that doesn't mean that I can't appreciate, you know, bourbons that don't sort of like, you know, grab you by the ghoulies and, you know, scream at you. Yeah, I mean, like I said, you know, considering what they did to the bog standard Buffalo Trace bottling, this is now the sort of the go-to whiskey, and I think it retails for roughly about the same sort of price as the Uncle Nearest. I'm pretty certain it's in that sort of 58, 59 sort of pound bracket, and I'd have this over that one every day of the week. It has to be said. Anyway, let's see what happens. Corn, dusty American oak, vanilla, rye intensity kind of builds wonderfully. It gets really sort of dry and tannic and spicy, but that underlying sweetness of the corn, and it's a dark corn rather than a sort of a fresher corn character. A little bit of sweetness from the oak as well. Beautiful, beautiful palate, wonderfully balanced, and that's the key here. It does have a relatively well, it has a sort of like quite a sort of a prominent rye character on the palate, but there's enough sweetness, there's enough oak, there's enough corn, it all kind of like balances up really nicely. I love the spiciness on the finish, I love the dryness, but I also, it's not too dry, it's not sort of mouth puckering, it's got that lovely intensity, and like I said, I mean, for me that is now the sort of like the go-to bottling from Buffalo Trace. So, and I'm glad you can get hold of it relatively easily, unlike the Eagle Rare 17, which is a bit of a unicorn these days. But that, that's damn good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Barrell Craft Spirits Mizunara finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Oh, yeah, now that's a nose. Well, considering it's only 20% rye, but that is actually relatively high in general sort of Bourbon-y kind of terms. It really comes off at you straight away. I'm getting that lovely sort of dark, spicy, peppery, sawdusty wood, a little bit of herbal rye, touch of edgy corn. It's got an edge to it, but it's not an unpleasant sort of unnatural edge to it. Now, unless you kind of know what you're looking for with Mizunara, that sort of sappiness, it's not obvious, but it is there, and I can get it, and it's not kind of weird and outlandish, it just kind of all really works together. You get that slight sappiness, you get that little bit of grass, there's some lemon, some ginger, a little bit of floral honey, there's a muskiness there as well. It's stunning. It is truly, truly stunning. It's a nose you have to work at. You have to kind of like go, right, okay, what am I getting? I'm getting the rye. Now what am I getting? Am I getting sort of the oak? And it's just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it is not a cheap whiskey at the end of the day. I mean, we are talking a 90 odd pound bottle, but this is what you want, you know. I want a 90 odd pound whiskey to go, I'm a 90 odd pound whiskey and I am stunning, you know. The last thing you want is to sort of like taste a 90 pound whiskey and go, well, yeah, it's all right. And I have done that, it has to be said. I love it. I mean, it's stunning. I mean, I with the exception of a couple of bottlings, if, as you remember, if you watched the episode of the show a few episodes back, that these guys have really set the bar high for themselves, and this just absolutely hits it. So it pass right. It's just frankly stunning. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's 58%, but it doesn't taste it. It's a dangerous whiskey. I mean, yes, all right, the alcohol's noticeable right on the finish, but it kind of kicks off with that sappy Mizunara oak. I get loads of it, but not to the detriment of the whiskey. Again, the sort of like dark, dark toffee, dark corn, herbal rye, spicy rye, bit of ginger. I mean, oh my God, the length is incredible. I mean, it is just, the spices are dancing on my tongue. Dark chocolate, ginger. Wow, wow, can that get any more stunning? I mean, that is a stunning whiskey. I love it. I mean, it doesn't need water. I could drink that quite comfortably without the necessity to add any water to it, but I am going to put a little drop to make sure it doesn't actually fall apart, because, you know, sometimes whiskies do fall apart when you put a little drop of water with. Oh, no, 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 that's not falling apart. More citric now. I'm getting tangerine, orange. Still, it's actually emphasised the sort of Mizunara oak, that sappiness. Almost like I said, like smelling wood sap. I mean, that is just stunning. There's a little breadiness there. It's almost kind of like buttered scone, or scone. You say potato, I say potato, but you know, scone. Yes, scone. I say scone. I don't say scone. Yeah. Anyway, stunning, stunning nose, absolutely stunning. Let's see what the pass like now. Okay, so it's not quite so spicy, it's not quite so intense. Obviously, the alcohol is emphasising the spices. It's a lot softer now, rounder, still quite sappy, a little bit more of the corn character coming through. But there's that lovely darkness there, a dustiness right in the background. I mean, you know, I don't care. I'd have it with water, I'd have it without. I mean, it is just, frankly, just a gorgeous whiskey. It is stunning. I cannot tell you how stunning this whiskey actually is. And the rest of their range, with one or two exceptions, is equally as stunning. And like I said, I mean, I'm blown away by the quality of what Barrell Craft Spirits are bottling, and that. Right, okay, so on to the final Heaven Hill bottling. This is the Elijah Craig 12-year-old barrel proof, and I mean barrel proof. You know, oh my God, that's a dangerous nose. That does not smell like 68%. It's got an intensity. Again, it's not a huge amount of rye. I don't think I think it's around about 12-15% rye, I think, the mash bill for the Elijah Craig. But again, it's there. It's more harder rye, if you like. It's more spicy rye. It's more cereal rye. There's not a lot of sweetness there, but there is some corn, toasted oak, vanilla, violets. There's a sort of a slight dried fruit maturity coming through, but again, it's that rye-centric nose, which is just absolutely stunning. It really is like a sort of like an arrow, it has to be said, and it's kind of that peppery, slightly sort of astringent rye. Wow, wow! I mean, stunning. So the pass on. Oh, mother! That just sucked the moisture out of my mouth, as we said. I mean, my God, that's intense. I mean, big alcohol, big rye, big spices. I mean, drying tannins. Yeah, there's a little bit of sweetness from the corn trying to creep in there, but you know, that rye has it in a bit of a vice-like grip. Charred oak, dried fruits. Oh my God, that's intensity off the charts, it has to be said. I mean, that is a hell of a whiskey, it has to be said. I mean, again, it ain't a cheap whiskey. I mean, we are in the three figures end of the spectrum here, but you want a three-figure whiskey to really say I am a three-figure whiskey, and my God, that does it. I mean, that is stunning, absolutely stunning. Let's see what a little drop of water with does to it. It's probably going to take some of the intensity off it, but hopefully not too much. Yeah, it's brought out a bit more of the sweeter corn. It's less intense, less spicy, but yeah, a little bit more marzipan coming out, a bit more oak. I mean, it's kind of like, as you know, sort of high alcohol, high ABV does kind of tend to sort of like, you know, make a nose feel quite tight, and it restricts the aromas to a certain extent, and it's now allowed some of that sort of sweeter corn, the sort of fatness to come out. And I mean, it's still a gorgeous nose, but I mean, you know, if you buy a bottle of this, you just have to sort of at least have one dram of it neat, because it's just, you know, it's sensational. Let's see what the pulse on now. Again, a little bit more sweeter now, sort of the rye has kind of dropped off a little bit, the sweetness of the corn has come through and getting a more vanilla. A little bit of coconut, rose petal, chewy, almost kind of malty intensity. It's a big chunky whiskey, but it's got elegance as well, it's got lightness, I mean, but it's got intensity still. The rye really is now only kind of like coming through on the finish, and I'm getting that slight bitterness of the sort of black pepper, the earth. It's stunning. But I mean, you know, if you're gonna taste this whiskey, you've got to sort of like, you know, taste it in it au natural, as they say. I mean, you have to experience the full-on intensity of that sort of spirit. I mean, because it is stunning. Right, okay, so that's from today's episode of the show. Well, damn, I enjoyed it. I don't know about you guys, but I enjoyed it. I mean, the problem is that you have to start with something, and I suppose the thing is, the Larceny is not a bad bottling. It's an okay bottling. I don't know what it retails for. If it retails for about 30 quid, 35 quid, then yeah, it's a good everyday kind of drinking bourbon at the end of the day. It doesn't have the complexity of the Elijah Craig, or the, you know, the whiskies at the end of the tasting. Not a surprise. It's relatively young spirit, but it's pleasant, it's well made, it's an everyday whiskey, and you could pretty much say the same for the Uncle Nearest. I mean, maybe some of the earlier bottlings were maybe more complex, and that's where they got the sort of like the big scores, the big reviews and all that kind of stuff, and now they're kind of bottling, I wouldn't say inferior spirit, but in spirit that's not quite living up to some of the earlier bottlings. I don't know, that's just an absolute guess. But again, it's like the Larceny, it's a good quality spirit, but it's just, in this instance, too expensive personally. I mean, you know, considering that that's roughly about the same price as the Eagle Rare 10, I think I would have the Eagle Rare 10 over that any day of the week. And I think the same goes for the sort of like the Abraham Bowman. I mean, again, it's nothing wrong with it. It's a well-made spirit. It's okay. You wouldn't expect anything completely crappy to sort of like come out of Sazerac at the end of the day. But it's not sort of something that I would seek out. It's all right. You know, nothing wrong with it. An everyday whiskey. I imagine it's probably in the same sort of price bracket as the Eagle Rare and the Uncle Nearest. So it's another one where I'd say, well, I'll have the Eagle Rare 10 if I'm going to have a, well, not that I'm rolling in cash, I'm going to afford to sort of like have a 60 odd pound bottle of whiskey as an everyday drinking whiskey. But you kind of get what I mean, you know, if I'm going to spend 60 quid, I'll have a bottle of the Eagle Rare 10, you know, because it's an almost, it is pretty much a banker at the end of the day, as they say. But then when you start to get into the sort of like the, what do they call it? Horrible word, super premium end of the, all that kind of gubbins. You get to the Barrell Craft Spirits bottlings, and you know, 90 odd quid. I know, horribly expensive, but damn, that screams a £90 bottle of whiskey. I mean, it's stunning. I mean, the balance is beautiful. I personally prefer it neat. You know, I'm a bit of an alcohol junkie. Am I? But the intensity is there. It's got the sort of like the balance of spirit and oak character absolutely down to a T. And the Eagle Rare 12, the Elijah Craig 12. Words fail me. Well, they don't. Words don't fail me. I mean, at the end of the day, it's stunning. I mean, it is absolutely mind-blowingly amazing at the end of the day. And yes, it's expensive. It's a 3-figure whiskey, and you know, you wouldn't. That's what you want. You want a 3-figure whiskey to just basically blow your head off with intensity and go. And it does that in absolute spades. It is an incredible bottling. If you can afford it and you can find a bottle, that's another key thing. I don't know whether they released a bottling this year or not. If they did, I'd probably missed it. I got the 18 single barrel, which is just sort of like, oh my god. But the 12, I just keep going on all day, and I'm going to run out of battery time, and I'm going to bore the hell out of you by going, oh my god, it's incredible. But oh my god, it is incredible. Yeah, highlight of the afternoon, has to be said. So all that's left to say is I hope you'll join me next week for the festive episode of the show. We will be, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to be tasting because it's going to be a surprise. I mean, you know it's going to be a fun episode of the show. I always like to try and drag out something really impressive, and well, I hate to say it, but the impressive samples are dwindling. I don't get them these days quite so much, so it's going to be pretty much a one-off, it has to be said. But anyway, today's episode of the show is all about the good old US of A, and all I can say is that the good old US of A can make some bloody good whiskey. Good afternoon, good dramming.
Closer now.